Hello friends. Welcome back to new course of high school session, which is fundamental analysis. In this course we will cover below lessons. What is fundamental analysis? Why interest rates matter to forex traders? How monetary policy affects the forex market? Hawkish and dovish central banks. Fundamental factors that affect currency values. Where to find forex news and market data. Market expectations of news and their impact on currencies. So let's begin the course with first lesson, which is what is fundamental analysis? Along your travels, you've undoubtedly come across Gulliver, Frodo, and the topic of fundamental analysis. Wait a minute. We've already given you a teaser about fundamental analysis during kindergarten. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty. What is it exactly and will I need to use it? Well, fundamental analysis is the study of fundamentals. That was easy, wasn't it? Ha! Gotcha. There's really more to it than that. So much more. Whenever you hear people mention fundamentals, they're really talking about the economic fundamentals of a currency's host country. Economic fundamentals cover a vast collection of information, whether in the form of economic, political or environmental reports, data, announcements or events. Even a credit rating downgrade qualifies as fundamental data, and you should see how Pip Crawler turned this news into a winning short euro to US dollar trade. Fundamental analysis is the use and study of these factors to forecast future price movements of currencies. It is the study of what's going on in the world and around us, economically and financially speaking, and it tends to focus on how macroeconomic elements, such as the growth of the economy, inflation, unemployment, affect whatever we're trading. Fundamental data and its many forms. In particular, fundamental analysis provides insight into how price action should or may react to a certain economic event. Fundamental data takes shape in many different forms. It can appear as a report released by the Fed on U.S. existing home sales. It can also exist in the possibility that the European Central Bank will change its monetary policy. The release of this data to the public often changes the economic landscape, or better yet, the economic mindset, creating a reaction from investors and speculators. There are even instances when no specific report has been released, but the anticipation of such a report happening is another example of fundamentals. Speculations of interest rate hikes can be priced in hours or even days before the actual interest rate statement. In fact, currency pairs have been known to sometimes move 100 pips just moments before major economic news, making for a profitable time to trade for the brave. That's why many forex traders are often on their toes prior to certain economic releases, and you should be too. Generally, economic indicators make up a large portion of data used in fundamental analysis. Like a fire alarm sounding when it detects smoke or feels heat, economic indicators provide some insight into how well a country's economy is doing. While it's important to know the numerical value of an indicator, equally as important is the market's anticipation and prediction of that value. Understanding the resulting impact of the actual figure in relation to the forecasted figure is the most important part. These factors all need consideration when deciding to trade. Phew. Don't worry. It's simpler than it sounds, and you won't need to know rocket science to figure it all out. I suggest you visit PipTitty's daily economic roundup every day so that you can stay in the loop with the upcoming economic releases. Fundamental analysis is a valuable tool in estimating the future conditions of an economy, but not so much for predicting currency price direction. This type of analysis has a lot of gray areas because fundamental information in the form of reports, economic data releases or monetary policy change announcements is vaguer than actual technical indicators. Analysis of economic releases and reports of fundamental data usually goes something like this. An interest rate increase of that percentage may cause the euro to go up. The US dollar should go down with an indicator value in that range. Consumer confidence dipped 2% since the last report. Here's an economic report, now what? The market has a tendency to react based on how people feel. These feelings can be based on their reaction to economic reports, based on their assessment of current market conditions. And you guessed it, there are tons of people, all with different feelings and ideas. You're probably thinking, geez, there's a lot of uncertainty in fundamental analysis. You're actually very right. There's no way of knowing 100% where a currency pair will go because of some new fundamental data. That's not saying that fundamental analysis should be dismissed. Not at all. Because of the sheer volume of fundamental data available, most people simply have a hard time putting it all together. They understand a specific report, but can't factor it into the broader economic picture. This simply takes time and a deeper understanding of the data. Also, since most fundamental data are reported only for a single currency, fundamental data for the other currency in the pair would also be needed and would then have to be compared to get an accurate picture. As we mentioned from the get-go, it's all about pairing a strong currency with a weak one. At this point, you're probably still waiting for the answer to will I ever need to use fundamental analysis to become a successful Forex trader? We totally understand that there are purists on both sides. Technical analysis seems to be the preferred methodology of short-term Forex traders, with price action as their main focus. Intermediate or medium traders and some long-term traders like to focus on fundamental analysis too because it helps with currency valuation. We like to be a little crazy by saying you should use both. Technically focused strategies are blown to bits when a key fundamental event occurs. In the same respect, pure fundamental traders miss out on the short-term opportunities that pattern formations and technical levels bring. A mix of technical and fundamental analysis covers all angles. You're aware of the scheduled economic releases and events, but you can also identify and use the various technical tools and patterns that market players focus on. I have a couple of trade examples for you showing how the perfect blend of fundamental and technical analysis results in huge profits. Check out Cyclopip's huge win on Euro to Japanese yen and Happy Pip's 115 pip profit on New Zealand dollar to US dollar. There's your answer. Happy? In this lesson, we'll discuss the major fundamental factors that affect currencies. These are interest rates, monetary policies, and market-moving economic reports. Let's discuss now why interest rates matter to Forex traders. Interest rates make the Forex world go round. In other words, the Forex market is ruled by global interest rates. A currency's interest rate is probably the biggest factor in determining the perceived value of a currency. So knowing how a country's central bank sets its monetary policy, such as interest rate decisions, is a crucial thing to wrap your head around. One of the biggest influences on a central bank's interest rate decision is price stability or inflation. Inflation is a steady increase in the prices of goods and services. Inflation is the reason why your parents or your parents' parents paid a nickel for a soda pop in the 1920s, but now people pay 20 times more for the same product. It's generally accepted that moderate inflation comes with economic growth. However, too much inflation can harm an economy, and that's why central banks are always keeping a watchful eye on inflation-related economic indicators, such as the CPI and PCE. Here you can check the central bank name of different country. In an effort to keep inflation at a comfortable level, central banks will mostly likely increase interest rates, resulting in lower overall growth and slower inflation. This occurs because setting high interest rates normally force consumers and businesses to borrow less and save more, putting a damper on economic activity. Loans just become more expensive while sitting on cash becomes more attractive. On the other hand, when interest rates are decreasing, consumers and businesses are more inclined to borrow, because banks ease lending requirements, boosting retail and capital spending, thus helping the economy to grow. Yippee! Look into the below figure. What does this have to do with the Forex market? Well, currencies rely on interest rates because these dictate the flow of global capital into and out of a country. They're what investors use to determine if they'll invest in a country or go elsewhere. For instance, if you had your choice between a savings account offering 1% interest and another offering 25%, which would you choose? Neither, you say? Yay, we're inclined to go the same route, keep the money under the mattress, you know what we mean? But that's not an option. Huh? You would pick the 1%, right? We hope so. Because 1 is bigger than 0.25. Currencies work the same way. The higher a country's interest rate, the more likely its currency will strengthen. Currencies surrounded by lower interest rates are more likely to weaken over the longer term. Pretty simple stuff. The main point to be learned here is that domestic interest rates directly affect how global market players feel about a currency's value relative to another. Interest rate expectations. Markets are ever changing with the anticipation of different events and situations. Interest rates do the same thing, they change, but they definitely don't change as often. Most forex traders don't spend their time focused on current interest rates because the market has already priced them into the currency price. What is more important is where interest rates are expected to go. It's also important to know that interest rates tend to shift in line with monetary policy, or more specifically, with the end of monetary cycles. If rates have been going lower and lower over a period of time, it's almost inevitable that the opposite will happen. Rates will have to increase at some point. And you can count on the speculators to try to figure out when that will happen and by how much. The market will tell them. It's the nature of the beast. A shift in expectations is a signal that a shift in speculation will start, gaining more momentum as the interest rate change nears. While interest rates change with the gradual shift of monetary policy, market sentiment can also change rather suddenly from just a single report. This causes interest rates to change in a more drastic fashion or even in the opposite direction as originally anticipated. So you better watch out. Below is an example of one of many ways to monitor interest rate expectations and is one of the most watched news releases. The Federal Reserve's dot plot. The U.S. Central Bank uses this to signal its outlook for the path of interest rates. The Fed dot plot, which is published after each Fed meeting, shows the projections of the 16 members of the Federal Open Market Committee, the bigwigs in the Fed who are in charge of setting interest rates. See the below graph of Fed dot plot. Interest rate differentials. Pick a pair, any pair. Many forex traders use a technique of comparing one currency's interest rate to another currency's interest rate as the starting point for deciding whether a currency may weaken or strengthen. The difference between the two interest rates, known as the interest rate differential, is the key value to keep an eye on. This spread can help you identify shifts in currencies that might not be obvious. An interest rate differential that increases helps to reinforce the higher yielding currency, while a narrowing differential is positive for the lower yielding currency. Instances where the interest rates of the two countries move in opposite directions often produce some of the market's largest swing. An interest rate increase in one currency combined with the interest rate decrease of the other currency is a perfect equation for sharp swings. Nominal versus real interest rates. When people talk about interest rates, they are either referring to the nominal interest rate or the real interest rate. What's the difference? The nominal interest rate doesn't always tell the entire story. The nominal interest rate is the rate of interest before adjustments for inflation. Real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus expected inflation. The nominal rate is usually the stated or base rate that you see, for example, the yield on a bond. Look into the below example of nominal versus real interest rates. Markets, on the other hand, don't focus on this rate, but rather on the real interest rate. If you had a bond that carried a nominal yield of 6%, but inflation was at an annual rate of 5%, the bond's real yield would be 1%. Boo-hoo. That's a huge difference, so always remember to distinguish between the two. Let's seep into the next lesson, where we will discuss how monetary policy affects the forex market. As we mentioned earlier, national governments and their corresponding central banking authorities formulate monetary policy to achieve certain economic mandates or goals. Central banks and monetary policy go hand in hand, so you can't talk about one without talking about the other. While some of these mandates and goals are very similar between the world's central bank, each has their own unique set of goals brought on by their distinctive economies. Ultimately, monetary policy boils down to promoting and maintaining price stability and economic growth. To achieve their goals, central banks use monetary policy mainly to control the following: the interest rates tied to the cost of money, the rise in inflation, the money supply, reserve requirements over banks, the portion of depositors' balances that commercial banks must have on hand as cash, and lending to commercial banks via the discount window. Types of monetary policy. Monetary policy can be referred to in a couple different ways. Contractionary or restrictive monetary policy takes place if it reduces the size of the money supply. It can also occur with the raising of interest rates. The idea here is to slow economic growth with the high interest rates. Borrowing money becomes harder and more expensive, which reduces spending and investment by both consumers and businesses. Expansionary monetary policy, on the other hand, expands or increases the money supply, or decreases the interest rate. The cost of borrowing money goes down in hopes that spending and investment will go up. Accommodative monetary policy aims to create economic growth by lowering the interest rate, whereas tight monetary policy is set to reduce inflation or restrain economic growth by raising interest rates. Finally, neutral monetary policy intends to neither create growth nor fight inflation. The important thing to remember about inflation is that central banks usually have an inflation target in mind, say 2%. They might not come out and say it specifically, but their monetary policies all operate and focus on reaching this comfort zone. They know that some inflation is a good thing, but out-of-control inflation can remove the confidence people have in their economy, their job, and ultimately, their money. By having target inflation levels, central banks help market participants better understand how they, the central bankers, will deal with the current economic landscape. Let's take a look at an example. Back in January of 2010, inflation in the UK shot up to 3.5% from 2.9% in just 1 month. With a target inflation rate of 2%, the new 3.5% rate was well above the Bank of England's comfort zone. Mervyn King, the then governor of the BOE, followed up the report by reassuring people that temporary factors caused the sudden jump, and that the current inflation rate would fall in the near term with minimal action from the BOE. Whether or not his statements turned out to be true is not the point here. We just want to show that the market is in a better place when it knows why the central bank does or doesn't do something in relation to its target interest rate. Simply put, traders like stability. Central banks like stability. Bruce Banner prefers stability. Economies like stability. Knowing that inflation targets exist will help a trader to understand why a central bank does what it does. Round and round with monetary policy cycles. For those of you that follow the US dollar and economy, and that should be all of you, remember a few years back when the Fed increased interest rates by 10% out of the blue? It was the craziest thing to come out of the Fed ever, and the financial world was in an uproar. Wait, you don't remember this happening? It was all over the media. Petroleum prices went through the roof and milk was priced like gold. You must have been sleeping. Oh wait, we were just pulling your leg. We just wanted to make sure you were still awake. Monetary policy would never dramatically change like that. Most policy changes are made in small, incremental adjustments because the bigwigs at the central banks would have utter chaos on their hands if interest rates changed radically. Just the idea of something like that happening would disrupt not only the individual trader, but the economy as a whole. That's why we normally see interest rate changes of 25% to 1% at a time. Again, remember that central banks want price stability, not shock and awe. Part of this stability comes with the amount of time needed to make these interest rate changes happen. It can take several months to even several years. Just like forex traders who collect and study data to make their next move, central bankers do a similar job, but they have to focus their decision-making with the entire economy in mind, not just a single trade. Interest rate hikes can be like stepping on the brakes while interest rate cuts can be like hitting the accelerator, but bear in mind that consumers and business react a little more slowly to these changes. This lag time between the change in monetary policy and the actual effect on the economy can take 1 to 2 years. Hawkish and dovish central banks. We just learned that currency prices are affected a great deal by changes in a country's interest rates. We now know that interest rates are ultimately affected by a central bank's view on the economy and price stability, which influence monetary policy. Central banks operate like most other businesses in that they have a leader, a president or a chairman. It's that individual's role to be the voice of that central bank, conveying to the market which direction monetary policy is headed. And much like when Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg steps to the microphone, everyone listens. So by using the Pythagorean theorem, where a squared plus b squared equals c squared, wouldn't it make sense to keep an eye on what those guys at the central banks are saying? Yes, it's important to know what's coming down the road regarding potential monetary policy changes. And lucky for you, central banks are getting better at communicating with the market. Whether you actually understand what they're saying, well, that's a different story. So, the next time Jerome Powell or Mario Draghi are giving speeches, keep your ears open. Better yet, use the trusty babypips.com economic calendar to prepare yourself before the actual speech. While the central bank chairman isn't the only one making monetary policy decisions for a country or economy, what he or she has to say is only not ignored, but revered like the gospel. Okay, maybe that was a bit dramatic, but you get the point. Not all central bank officials carry the same weight. Central bank speeches have a way of inciting a market response, So watch for quick movement following an announcement. Speeches can include anything from changes, increases, decreases or holds, to current interest rates, to discussions about economic growth measurements and outlook, to monetary policy announcements outlining current and future changes. But don't despair if you can't tune into the live event. As soon as the speech or announcement hits the airwaves, news agencies from all over make the information available to the public. Forex analysts and traders alike take the news and try to dissect the overall tone and language of the announcement, taking special care to do this when interest rate changes or economic growth information are involved. Much like how the market reacts to the release of other economic reports or indicators, Forex traders react more to central bank activity and interest rate changes when they don't fall in line with current market expectation. It's getting easier to foresee how a monetary policy will develop over time, due to an increasing transparency by central banks. Yet there's always a possibility that central bankers will change their outlook in greater or lesser magnitude than expected. It's during these times that market volatility is high and care should be taken with existing and new trade positions. Hawkish versus dovish central banks. Yes, you're in the right place. Tonight's match puts the LA Hawks up against the NY Doves. You're in for a treat. Wait, what? Whoops, sorry, wrong subject. We really just meant Hawks versus Doves, central bank Hawks versus central bank Doves, that is. Central bankers can be viewed as either hawkish or dovish, depending on how they approach certain economic situations. Hawkish. Central bankers are described as hawkish when they are in support of the raising of interest rates to fight inflation, even to the detriment of economic growth and employment. Words like tighten and heating up will be used. For example, the Bank of England suggests the existence of a threat of high inflation. The Bank of England could be described as being hawkish if they made an official statement leaning towards the increasing of interest rates to reduce high inflation. Dovish. Dovish central bankers, on the other hand, generally favor economic growth and employment over tightening interest rates. They also tend to have a more non-aggressive stance or viewpoint regarding a specific economic event or action. Words like soften and cooling down will be used. And the winner is? It's a tie. Well, sort of. You'll find many a banker on the fence, exhibiting both hawkish and dovish tendencies. However, true colors tend to shine when extreme market conditions occur. So guys, this video is completed here. As still we have so many things to discuss in this course. So remaining 3 lessons of this course will be covered in next video. Stay tuned.